Welcome back to the Word of Mouth podcast. I'm your host, Jeff, and I'm joined with my co-host, Troy, today.
It's good to be back with you, Jeff.
Awesome. So we got a lot of feedback about our last episode, which covered a lot more of the maybe small B business of dentistry as opposed to the big B business of dentistry. So for now, we're going to shift away from covering the news, the trends, the kind of business of dentistry, the big B business, kind of the macro things that affect business, and cover more of what goes into the small business component. Most practices are small businesses, and cover that more on the Word of Mouth podcast. So you can look forward to that more in the upcoming episodes.
Which is fun for us. Of course, we love watching trends and seeing what's happening from a regulatory standpoint and those different considerations. But our passion is really the small business element of dental and orthodontic practices. So this is kind of a fun focus or pivot for us.
Yeah, it's super in line with what we do every day, so it makes prepping for the podcast certainly a lot easier, which is a good thing for us and a good thing for all of our listeners. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about marketing and about how to grow your practice in a way that is in line with your practice. Because there could be two practices who offer the same treatment in the same town who need wildly different strategies in order to grow their practice effectively.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about kind of the nature, the commoditization of the dental industry generally. How that impacts an individual practice really depends on, in part, some of it's a choice just as to how they're approaching marketing generally, but some of it is also a reflection of how that practice approaches patient care and that patient relationship and the patient experience, as well as, honestly, the quality of dentistry that the dentist provides. So we're going to talk today about how those considerations impact the type of marketing that's really best suited to a particular practice.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of break this down almost like an Eisenhower matrix, where you have kind of the maybe premium feel of the practice along one axis and the premium feel of the clinical expertise of the dentist on the other, or clinical maybe ability of the dentist on the other axis. And so you end up with kind of a lower clinical ability, lower end practice, a higher clinical ability, but a lower end practice, a high clinical ability and a high end practice, or a high end practice with lower clinical ability. And I think that one's maybe the most rare, but we can kind of talk through what each of these needs. And I think we can start with that bottom quadrant where it is the lower clinical ability and the maybe lower quality of care practice. And that's primarily where DSOs live.
Yes, or at least it's where volume lives.
Yeah.
You know, there's not really another marketing opportunity other than really trying to grow the practice volume. And you know, that it's a sad reality, and there are certainly things that can change about the practice or change about the expertise or the quality of the dentistry to move them into one of those other quadrants. But as long as they're residing in that particular quadrant, volume is the marketing approach that makes the most sense. It's going to be price driven, it's going to be promotion driven, it's going to be convenience driven. And unless something changes about either of those, unless there's movement along either of those axes, it's really difficult to successfully approach a different marketing. Unless something changes or the practice or dentist moves on one of those axes, it's really difficult to deploy a kind of a differentiated model to their marketing.
Yeah, that practice primarily lives in the commodity zone, where they're just providing the same kind of churn and burn bread and butter dentistry, and it does have to be a volume play. And the strategy for that in terms of marketing is typically just spend more, which is where I think a lot of dentists try to compete without recognizing that they actually are better clinically, or their practice is better positioned to a point where that's actually not the right solution for their practice.
Yeah, and I will say that there are still, I guess, 2 points that we want to make. This isn't a question of bread and butter dentistry or not bread and butter dentistry.
Absolutely.
Because there are extraordinarily capable dentists and practices that really have developed an amazing patient experience. that really have decided, they've made the decision, they really want to focus on bread and butter dentistry, which we applaud, and that's fantastic. At the same time, yes, spend more is the easiest way to increase volume. There are some local opportunities, to try to build some of that word of mouth. The messaging just has to align with what you're offering. If you're offering a patient experience where the clinic's crowded, where maybe the technology isn't totally up to date, if there's a high turnover, so the patient care or the expertise on the dentistry isn't as good, you don't want to go in and saying, hey, or you don't want to go to the market trying to convince them that you have the best patient experience or that you have the highest clinical expertise. Instead, we are convenient, we are affordable is a totally acceptable way to go to the marketplace, to the community, and offer that service. And there's a large segment of the population that is receptive to that message. It's just going to be the segment of the population that's more cost sensitive, and there's probably not going to be the same duration, or said another way, a higher churn rate is what you'd expect in that type of practice. So,
yeah, it definitely decreased lifetime value of a patient. But if you have enough volume, again, it's kind of that sliding scale of, if you have enough volume, the number can be lower because you have more frequency. And so I think that one theme that you just pointed out that I didn't really think about, but needs to be pointed out now, and we'll probably continue to touch on it, is that it does just need to come down to the dentist sort of being honest with, or the business owner sort of being honest with what their business is.
Yeah. And I think that I don't want to have what we're saying suggest that it's what we'd encourage. That's a difficult model. It's going to become increasingly difficult. So we would certainly suggest that if a practice finds themselves in that quadrant, that they're really evaluating ways to improve on either or both axes to allow for a little bit of an escape from being, kind of stuck in that quadrant. However, if someone's making the business decision that is the business model they want to run, or they just don't have a mechanism to move out of it, you hit the nail on the head. That be honest with patients, not saying, hey, we do a lousy job, but hey, we are we are a price-based or a convenience-based practice. Also be a little bit honest with yourself as the practice owner, that is the model that you're running. And as you're looking at business systems and prioritizing different elements of the business, efficiency really is going to be, an important lever to be looking at, because costs are going up and those margins shrink. So it's a difficult model. Not that you can't do it, but I think, to your point, honest with the patients, honest with yourself, and really focus on how to be the best commodity practice in your area. So,
yeah, like you said, none of these models are inherently bad or good. They just are either more or less difficult depending on how you attack them. And so, like this one, it might be more difficult in terms of kind of maintaining volume, but attracting patients. If you're saying, hey, we're affordable dentists in this convenient location, the marketing may be a little bit easier, but it does shift to the other side, where now kind of operations within your practice become a little more challenging. So that's it. There's kind of pros and cons to every single one of these areas.
For sure. And the one other piece that we haven't hit on, but it's important to recognize, is that insurance providers, insurance companies, these are the ones that fit that model the best. So as a lot of dentists are seeking to exit, or at least reduce their dependency on insurance plans, there is going to be some added space for these commodity dentists to take a larger share of those that are insured by those companies and are using that insurance coverage as a primary consideration of which dentist to select. So there are some opportunities. There's some low-hanging fruit. I would just say from a long-term viability perspective, some of that fruit maybe has a shorter shelf life than some of the fruit that's a little harder to get to if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So let's move on to the next quadrant. Where do we want to go next?
Well, probably the easiest one, just because oftentimes it's a bit more measurable, is the expertise of the dentist, or of the care that's received there. A lot of dentists are really focused on strategic use of their required continuing education to develop expertise and abilities that provide, really exceptional and increasingly broad range of services for their patients. And those practices that are really focused on developing that side of the practice, there's some really neat opportunities to differentiate on that, on that basis. And so that would certainly be a different quadrant in someone that's trying to escape that commodity quadrant, or simply is experiencing commodity type marketing themselves despite expertise. Leaning into those credentials, and leaning into the services and technology that they're offering is a good way to differentiate in the marketplace.
Yeah, organizing your differentiation around your targeting services rather than just trying to be everything to everyone. I think that's ultimately, looking back at the commodity based and looking ahead, is you can't. No, that is like marketing 101. You can't be everything to everyone because you dilute your message too much. So if you're going to be kind of that commodity volume driven dentist, be that commodity volume driven dentist, and you can market that way, but that means you can't also market premium implants or full mouth restorations. Like that, you have to have a message that aligns and targets the people who are going to be the most likely to come in and be the revenue drivers for your practice.
Yeah, and there's oftentimes even for a general dentist who offers a wide range of services, there oftentimes will be a particular service that, honestly, even either economically or because of a particular interest or expertise that they have, that they really want to focus on. And that's something that you can go to market with an expertise in that particular thing. And it doesn't mean that you don't provide the, bread and butter dentistry, or don't provide adjacent services or other services, but it's a way to be known for something as an expert in something, and have that be an important part of your branding, so that you do have the opportunity to maybe expand a little geographically by being the expert in a wider area for a specific service, while still providing that wide range, that kind of comprehensive care. So it's not an either or, but from a marketing and a differentiation standpoint, oftentimes it's much better to say, hey, I am the sedation dentist, or I'm the dentist for people who don't think they should go to the dentist or can't go to the dentist, or something like that. That's a unique message. That's a differentiation. But anyone else that calls looking for general dentistry or comprehensive care, wonderful, you can accept them, but it allows you to just approach the market in a different way than the competitors that are just simply saying, hey, we're friendly dentists, or we take care of everyone.
Yeah, if you look at automotive repair as an analog for this, like you have the Jiffy Lubes where they'll service any vehicle. You just come in, but they just do the simplest service, brakes and oil changes, and that's kind of what they handle. If you go to maybe a specialist, you might get a series of brands. Like they do all European cars, and that's what or all Japanese cars, and that's where they specialize. And it's a little bit of a specialty, but you could have a Honda or a Toyota, and they can kind of repair it. And then if you go to the dealership, it's one kind of car. That's all they do there. And that would be maybe like an orthodontist in this example, where they really don't want to do any other services. But the idea of cross-sells and upsells, those things that are marketing principles that are very commonplace to us, are not things that a lot of dentists, I think about. And so when you're marketing, you sell your primary service. But then if someone comes in and says, well, I need a cleaning, if you do cleanings, great. Have a cross-sell. If they come in and they say, hey, well, I don't actually want the implant now, but I would like to come back for a cleaning in 6 months. Great, that's a downsell. So these marketing principles that are really commonplace for us because we live and breathe that are maybe not so common, but they apply beautifully to dentistry.
Yeah, and maybe to borrow your analogy a little bit, there's a auto repair shop near us that does all sorts of repairs, from oil changes all the way through. But they've decided to focus on transmission repairs and replacements for American cars. And so they do a lot of branding or a lot of marketing for that particular service. And so a lot of people know them as a transmission specialist, despite the fact that they have people that are coming in for oil changes and everything else. So again, some of it is, the idea of general marketing principles. Even if you can service everyone, it doesn't mean you need to speak to everyone. And oftentimes that's the big mistake. Even if you can take care of them, you want to identify who your ideal patient is and make sure that you are speaking to them. And if there's a specialty or a credential or something that distinguishes a dentist for a particular patient type or treatment type, that's just an opportunity to speak to people who need that and are looking for that in a way that differentiates from the general dentist messaging that they're hearing from other practices. So it's just a good way to stand out in a really noisy and crowded marketplace.
Yeah, we talk about finding your community, and this is really part of that, is be the person who is what your community needs. And you get to decide who that is, and you get to decide who your community is. But that's when you're a specialist, you find the people that are looking for you. Yeah.
So the next, maybe kind of going the other direction on the other axis is practices that have really focused on the patient experience. That can take a lot of different forms. One that we hear a lot about, because people appreciate it so much, is that they're really conscious of the time, so that when someone shows up for an appointment at 9 a.m., the expectation at the practice level is that they are walking into their seat, the operatory, at 9 a.m. They're not waiting in the waiting room for a half hour. And a lot of busy professionals or people with children or just, people that are busy, that's a really important feature for a lot of folks. The quality or the aesthetics of the clinic are often something that people really value. Personal outreach by the practitioners, again, one of those things that a lot of people have found success in creating an experience by using those. But practices can really differentiate by focusing on what creates high perceived value with their patients.
Yeah, I think there's other things like amenities in the practice. So like noise canceling headphones or Netflix on the TV on the roof. I know I've had a dentist at one point in my life who had that. I thought it was awesome. I haven't seen it again since, but it would be something that would maybe, at least for me, have me think about committing to that dentist, even if the level of care is maybe a little bit lower. And that's because I don't have a lot of dental issues, so I don't necessarily feel like I'm looking for a specialist. I'm just looking for that practice that kind of makes me feel comfortable and is enjoyable to go to.
Yeah, I will say one other, that we have a great dentist. Shout out to Highland Heights Dentistry. But one of the things that they do is they're very, very gentle in their cleanings. And that isn't always the case, but they really work with their hygienists. And we, recommended my mother-in-law go and give them a try, and she just loved it for that reason. So that's again one of those experiences that she's now, until they unless they change policies or they're no longer quite that gentle, she's a patient for life, because that's something that's really important for her, because she's experienced the opposite, which was very fast and fairly aggressive cleanings that were very painful for her. So again, there's different levers that can be pulled that will speak to different patient profiles, but that's an opportunity to really engineer differentiation by how you architect your in-clinic patient experience. One thing that I'd note is this is a real powerful driver of word of mouth. So it is something that if a practice is really looking to escape the commodity pressures, this is a place that that there's some good opportunities to start differentiating by really focusing on those patient experience features.
Definitely. And I want to call out just quickly something you mentioned about the hygienist's focus on gentle cleaning. As a dentist, you have an opportunity, or a practice manager, you have an opportunity to focus trainings on certain areas. And so if your goal is to sell molar full mouth restorations or more implant cases and convert those, not to like sell them to people who don't need them, but if you want to increase your conversion rate, that kind of sales training, for lack of a better word, can be part of that focus with the hygienists. If conversely, the patient experience is the big driver of success, that training needs to be about how do we as a practice, how do you hygienists help the patients have the best possible clinical experience, or in-clinic experience rather.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, one of those things that we hear a lot of lip service too, but there isn't really an organized approach in a lot of practices. Not that they're not well intended. It's just it exists. Patient experience exists sort of at a large conceptual level for a lot of practices. They're not really drilling down to say what would matter to the patients that we're trying to target.
Yeah.
That oftentimes will help prioritize what should be focused on first. So again, kind of identifying what patients are you trying to target and what would be important to them is a good way to start making some movements towards that, that type of differentiation.
And a good way to identify those things is any practice that's kind of operating consistently right now has 1,000 to 2,000 patients that are actively coming in. Go through, identify who are your top 20 patients, the patients that when they come in, you just think this is going to be the best appointment that's so easy. I love working with them. I love speaking with them. Identify those people. And then what do those people say about your practice that's positive? Why do they keep coming back? What is a good experience for them? And then focus on those things. And that's an easy way to kind of duplicate them, because the people who are passionate about a gentle cleaning will go find their friends who are complaining. I know that that's something my father-in-law, he went to his dentist and he referred his 2 daughters, his wife, his 2 sisters, his father, and it was all about the gentle cleaning. He loved the hygienists. And so I do think that that's a huge one, but we're not saying that's the only one.
Right.
And I think that that's something that this entire episode needs to be taken into, this needs to be crafted for your practice where you're at. And that's where that honesty comes in.
Yeah. Well, so then, of course, the pinnacle is those that have both, tremendous dentistry, technologically advanced, well-credentialed, all of the advantages on that axis, and at the same time have really engineered a great patient experience. For those practices, there really are a lot of great opportunities to focus very, very precisely on what type of treatments or what type of patients you are wanting to attract more of.
And both, really.
For sure. There's just a lot of opportunities. And so it's always a little bit challenging for any small business owner to contemplate turning away patients. But what we see with some of our clients that really are just very well-run practices with excellent treatment for their patients is they are losing money by accepting patients and continuing to treat patients that aren't well aligned with the type of patients that they're trying to get. Now, it doesn't mean that you go out and you dump, half of your patient base, but the reality is that both economically and just from a quality of practice experience and a quality of life consideration, if you have the ability to get more of the right type of patients, it really matters. And it can be financially a real boon. We like to kind of talk like a 20-60-20 division of potential patients. There's 20% that are really your ideal patient type. And as you look in the marketplace, all you're trying to do is get more of that 20. Now there's 60% that are just fine. And they're not ones that, you necessarily need to dump immediately or whatnot, but they're a little bit of a filler portion of the market. Oftentimes they come as a consequence of that top 20%. But there's also this bottom 20%. And whether it's because of the insurance plan they're on, whether it's because of their reluctance to accept treatments, whether it's because they don't make it to their appointments, they're always rescheduled, whatever it is, there's 20% of the market that you simply don't want any part of. And you need to make sure in your marketing messaging and the way that you're presenting your practice identity and differentiation that you make clear that you are not the dentist, not the practice for them.
Yeah, I think getting clear on kind of who you're trying to attract and the kinds of patient you're trying to attract, the culture you're building in your practice, all of those things work together, and they are the drivers of the word of mouth engine. You still have to be very intentional about growing that word of mouth engine for your practice. That doesn't just happen because you provide a good service. I think there's a statistic that's people are like 15 times more likely or something to leave a negative review than a positive one. And that is what you're battling against with kind of the word of mouth. People don't just go home and brag about their dentist. They talk about their dentist when they're prompted, and that can be a prompting from their friend saying, hey, I'm looking for a dentist. That can also be a prompting from the dentist saying, hey, if you know anyone who's looking for a dentist. And that's how my father-in-law put it out to all of his people is he had a great experience. The dentist said, do you know anyone who's looking for a dentist? And it was like within a week, he'd sent 10 referrals to this dentist just because of a simple system to attract that word of mouth kind of patient.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing, especially within the environment that we're in right now. A lot of dentists, especially those that have relied on paid ads, are feeling a lot of pressure. There's a lot of nervousness about what the future looks like. And the antidote to the problems that we're seeing with a paid ad centric approach in terms of the long-term viability is to start building out those word of mouth systems, really making it intentional and figuring out how do we connect with the community, how do we network with the community, how do we start creating a really meaningful brand in the community that's differentiated from all of the other dentists. And the important thing is that it takes time. Whereas a paid ads, I can pay and turn them on tomorrow, and that light switch goes on. Now, it's getting dimmer and dimmer. It's more and more expensive in terms of patient acquisition cost, but I can turn it on immediately. It's not the same way with those local systems and that word of mouth marketing. The good news is, yes, it does take time. Yes, it does take consistent effort, but it's also sustainable. It's defensible, and it compounds over time as you continue to build it out. So it's the right move, especially for those, really exceptional practices that have an opportunity to differentiate but haven't really focused on that. Great opportunity. But, we just need to be honest and clear with people that it does take time and it does take consistency, but the payoff is, the practice that you really want. And so it's the right move, but there's some acknowledgement that it's not quite as easy as turning on ads. So
yeah, and I think we need to also acknowledge that not every practice is there. Not every practice is ready for this kind of word of mouth push. They're relying on paid ads, and it's because they don't really have an opportunity because of the way their practice is structured or because of kind of the clinical focus of the practice. Not every practice is ready to kind of take on this kind of marketing.
Yeah. It's a really good point. What we talk with a lot of our clients and a lot of the dentists that we interact with, it's all about having a story to tell. And the better story you have in terms of why someone would want to choose you versus another dentist, the better that story is. Not in a, not in a salesy way or gimmicky way, but just in an authentic way. The better you can articulate the quality of the dentistry as really unique, the better you can really tell a story about how the patient experience in your clinic is better than what they are experiencing in the average dental clinic. The better those stories are, the easier they are to tell. And so, of course, those practices that really do have exceptional treatment and do have, really outstanding patient experience, well, that's just an easier thing to take to the marketplace and develop those word of mouth opportunities and systems. So they have a leg up for sure. But, again, it just requires focused effort, like you said, which I think is a really important point. Great dentistry, great patient experience. It's just not enough because people, you hate that it's the case, but you're kind of out of sight, out of mind. They finish up their treatment, and for most people, they're just not thinking about their dentist for 6 more months. And even then, it's just to go into their appointment. So having systems that encourage and provide a reason and provide reminders for them to share the experiences that they've had with you, it's just a really important thing to do.
Yeah. There's the having the message and then the ability to get that message out. And those are very closely married, and neither one is necessarily easy. It requires great dentistry. It requires great discipline by the practice. And then it requires a marketing method or a marketing system in order to amplify and get that message out.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
One thing that we do with all of our clients and with a lot of the dentists we talk with is it's the first thing that we do, and it's build out a practice identity guide. Kind of who is the practice, what makes it special, what makes it different, and those things. We've had amazing feedback. We just had an orthodontist that we're working with who said, I don't think I could have written this better myself. And it's because we get a little bit of what drives the right story, and working with dentists and orthodontists and unpacking that kind of what makes you different is a good exercise, because all of us lose the forest for the trees in our own life. We live in such a refined or in such a confined headspace where it's hard to recognize some of those differentiation points, and that's something that we've found a lot of value with and is one of the first steps. And that's why we like to work with dentists who do have either clinical excellence or practice excellence, and then
or
try
both.
and help them, or both, and regardless,
ideally
help them
both,
move into that fourth quadrant that is where both are excellent, and then the word of mouth engine can really start chugging along.
I'm glad you brought it up. It was an interesting thing that orthodontist, she did something really smart. I mean, she really enjoyed the identity and differentiation guide that we put together. It felt like it really articulated her purpose and what she had tried to build. She took it to the next step and had all of her staff read this guide. And she said, we are going to be reviewing this monthly because I want this to be the story that they're telling our clients, I want this to be who we are. And it's a really smart thing to understand the importance. Dental practices aren't any different than any other business. That culture, that shared vision, it's really important, and getting clear on what makes you different, that differentiation and what makes you unique. It can be really empowering for your staff, which is a great multiplier for the word of mouth effort.
Yeah. So if you're interested in getting a practice identity guide built for your practice, or talking with us about how we can kind of move you into that fourth quadrant or amplify you if you're in that fourth quadrant, we'd love to chat. The link is in the description. We're here on YouTube. We'd love for you to comment. Let us know what your identity is. We'd love to have a comment full of identities. And we love hearing from our dentist friends. We also are on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. So subscribe, leave a review. It really helps us out. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one.